lovies. Welcome to another episode of A Little Perspective with Samyuktha and Angela. Super excited to be talking with Justin Harford today. We are going to talk about his experiences as someone with blindness and different thoughts on advocacy and accommodations as well. So, Samyuktha, how are you feeling today? I'm so excited about today's episode.
Yes. Thank you, Angela. I'm feeling great. I'm so glad that Justin is able to join us and talk about his experiences living with a disability. This is episode 2 of A Little Perspective, season 2. So I'm excited to have Justin be a part of this process. He is a project coordinator, at Mobility International USA in Eugene, Oregon. So Justin, thank you again for joining us on this podcast. Why don't you start it off by telling us about yourselves?
Sure. Thank you, Samyuktha and Angela. It's a pleasure to be here with you. My name is Justin Harford, and like you said, I'm a project coordinator with Mobility International USA, or MIUSA. I'm about 33 years old. I'm originally from California, which is a fancy way of saying that I now live in Oregon. And I guess kind of my whole thing has always been that a couple things. First of all, I'm passionate about international education and travel, and I'm also passionate about history. And for me, both of them are really about bringing out the question of how do things change over time, and how will they be changing in the future, and how can people understand each other better. And to me, when I study history or when I've traveled to other countries, both of them are really kind of a form of exploration for me, to meet people from a different culture and to learn about different ways that they think about the world and what I can take from that, or at least what I can learn from that. And so like I said, I went to UC Berkeley. I have just a BA, and I've been working in nonprofit for 7 years.
Wow, that awesome. Is so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I love when you said, how do things change? How can we understand each other better? So Samyuktha, I'm going to let you lead the conversation, but I would love to hear the both of you talk about travel. Like, I'd love to start it there. Because Samyuktha, you and I have had many a conversation with your experience with that and your blog and such. So I'd love to hear, you guys talk about that a little bit.
Samyuktha, you have a blog about that, right? littletraveling.com. Why don't you tell us about that and your experience?
Yeah, sure. So that is, just how I was able to, get in touch with Justin and meet Justin and be a part of, be able to speak at the event, at the program, the
Access to Exchange Summer Institute.
The Access to Exchange Summer Institute through the NCDE grant. So I love to travel. That is, my biggest hobby. That's my biggest pastime. And I have a traveling blog called Just a Little Traveling, which not only I post pictures and, summarize my experiences, but I talk about access. I provide guidance and tips and advice for people with dwarfism, so they can feel more comfortable traveling, so they know, what is the situation in the countries or the states that I go to, and what are the rights for people with disabilities. Like, I was just in Colorado in October. I went to the Rocky Mountains, and the Rocky Mountain National Park, I'm still laughing about it right now, because like they designate some of those trails, like the hiking trails, as ADA compliant, and ADA compliant Americans with the Disabilities Act, like they have, standards. Like Justin probably will know this too. Like they have you have to meet certain requirements, certain design standards to be ADA compliant. And these trails that were supposedly ADA compliant were not, because in my book, if a wheelchair user cannot go on the trails, it is not ADA compliant. because I was still having trouble walking those trails. It's not flat, it's very rocky. There's still some elevation. Like one trail was still icy and muddy, and I had to still hold on to my friend's arm to like walk, get through it to the other side of the mountain. So it was frustrating. And no, so that's just an example of, what I talk about on my blog, and getting through the airport, or, all the traveling tips, and just the different sources, people with disabilities can access so they can feel better traveling. So that's how I came to get to know Justin and his work and be a part of his program.
Yeah, Samyuktha actually applied. I should go back a little bit. So I work on the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange grant, which is sponsored by Department of State. And the idea is that we consult with international education providers on how to include people with disabilities in their programs. The idea is that people with disabilities should be able to access the whole range of study and volunteer abroad opportunities like Peace Corps or Boren, and that they shouldn't have to go to a special program to be able to study abroad. And what we also do is advise disabled people on how to study abroad themselves too, and kind of educating. We want to educate them on the processes, how to understand how the international education provider is going to think about your accommodations, understanding what you could expect or could not expect from an international education provider, and learning about how to, your rights around disability disclosure, how you can negotiate accommodations and things like that. And we, a couple months ago, held our first ever Access to Exchange Summer Institute, which was a 3-week course first 3-week course ever designed to teach people with disabilities about this in an organized and coherent way. And Samyuktha was one of our guest speakers. Yeah, and travel, it's interesting that you mentioned, travel can be unpredictable. And most notably because of the fact that when we talk about accessible, we usually could be talking about different things. And your comment about the trail kind of made me think about how at the recreation center that I love to go to, where they have all kinds of machines and swimming pool and everything, they say that they're accessible, but not all of their machines are accessible. And for me, I was just trying, they had a row of recumbent bikes that I really liked to use, and they had buttons that were tactile, and I could start the machine up and adjust it myself. Well, they cleared out that entire row because they wanted to paint a mural on the wall behind them. And they left another row of recumbent bikes that are all operated by touchscreens.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Yeah, I was going to piggyback on what Samyuktha had said about ADA, and typically it is focused more so on wheelchair users, and so things that are ADA compliant, while obviously that's what we want because so many things still aren't, it still doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's the best for all disabilities, which of course you can't guarantee that. But I think sometimes people who are not directly connected to the disability world, have a tendency just naturally to lump all disabilities together and think, well, you have an accessible bathroom. Well, yeah, for a wheelchair user maybe, but not for someone whose legs are less than 2 feet long. So just to kind of piggyback a little bit on what you guys were speaking of as far as compliance versus accommodation.
Yeah, and even actually, like for wheelchair users, it's a challenge. I knew a man a few years ago who had worked for the state of California all his life, and when I knew him, he was retired, and he liked to travel around, and he could give me a whole litany every time I sat down with him about, I went to this hotel and they said they had an accessible roll-in shower and it was a tub, or they said they had a grab bar but it was too far from the toilet, or so even with or the doors weren't wide enough. That's another one. So yeah, people can sometimes I think especially in internet, when you study abroad, you've really got to force people to think about what exactly does accessible mean. So we always are trying to get people to talk about, okay, instead of saying, I need an accessible homestay, what you should say is, I need a homestay with a ramp that I can get through and doors that are yay length wide. And I don't need a roll-in shower, but I do need a grab bar, something like that. So.
Exactly. I think like you can't expect, like when you have needs, in whether it's like, hotel accommodations when you're traveling, you have to be very specific. And like what Angela is saying, like just because it's accessible for one person doesn't mean it'll be accessible for another person with disability. So like you said, Justin, like be specific with what you need, because like, like with a hotel, they may say, oh, we have bars, or we have a roll-in shower, but it may not work for, me. Like people with dwarfism, we need, step stools. These roll-in showers are not going to work for us because we still can't access the sink or like the certain, it won't work for us. So that's why it's really important to be specific and ask questions. It's better to know ahead of time if they can't assist, because then you can find another solution. But if they say they have it and you go and it's not what you need, you're stuck. And that's very, very frustrating, and it can really change the whole outlook of a trip. It can really, it's very disappointing.
Yes.
So can you talk to us about your experiences traveling? Like you mentioned that you spent, a 10-week immersive trip in Mexico, and you also did a thesis in Chile about the history of people with disabilities there. Like, can you talk about your experiences and like just like what you've encountered and how that was?
Yeah, let me see. I mean, it's a long story between the two, but in Mexico, I studied abroad in the summer of 2008. It was about a 10-week program, and I took classes in the mornings and did kind of homework and salsa dancing in the afternoon. There was a great dance house where you could pay 300 pesos, which was about $30 at the time, and you think you got like 20 lessons out of that. So it was a lot of bang for your pesos. And it was equivalent to 3 and 4 semester Spanish. And I had the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation volunteer to pay for a reader for me. So we found by emailing to the other students in the program, we found this really nice girl who was very reliably there after class every day to sit and read to me for a couple hours the books that we were required to review, the chapters that we had to review. And the teachers had been on strike, so I wasn't really able to get most of my reading materials from UC Berkeley at the time. And we traveled to I lived in Morelia, which is a city in Michoacan. And we got to see cities like Guadalajara and Guanajuato, Mexico City. It was before it was called Distrito Federal, but it's not anymore now. It's just called Mexico City. And I met a good friend there that I still know today, who's also blind. And he is a musician in Morelia, and he also works for a local sort of independence training government agency. I think that provides services to blind people. And I went to Chile in the academic year of 2010 to 2011, the American academic year, because their academic year is the other way around, because their seasons are the other way around. So I was catching the last of their academic year and then grabbing the first of the next academic year. And most of the time I stayed with a host family at the beginning for like 2 or 3 months. And I found after a while that I was not really getting access to the kitchen or to be able to, serve myself food or anything like that. There was another student who was there also, and she was able to just go into the kitchen and get herself something. And I kind of got tired of that after a while. So I went and rented an apartment downtown, and I stayed for the rest of the 9 or 10 months and next to what they call the Plaza de Armas, which is basically like right in the middle of downtown Santiago. And it was a 1-bedroom apartment, and that was fun. It was like the first time in my life that I could pay my bills and live in a pretty good place. And I took classes towards my major, and I would say that my college in the United States did not digitalize any of my book materials. And to be honest, I don't know that they could have, even if I was dealing with a more amenable disability resource center, because of the fact that you basically, at the beginning of the semester, you'd shop around for classes, and then you decide a week or two in which classes you were going to keep and which ones you were going to drop. And then I, for someone like me, where normally I would be expected to declare my classes 2 or 3 months before, and then get the materials to the resource center and get them to digitalize the books for me. I basically had to use my own means to basically convert materials myself, or to recruit people to read to me, or whatever the case was. So yeah, in my last semester, I researched the history of the blind in Chilean society from 1920 to 1951 or so. And the first semester I did a volunteerism at a organization called Proyecto Agora, which was a nonprofit that finds employment for blind people in Santiago. So long story for sure.
Wow, but like so exciting. I mean, man, these guests on this podcast make me feel like I'm just like sitting on my tail, not doing anything. I love it so much.
When I look back at those years, I kind of feel like I'm still sitting on my tail, Angela. I just think that was 10 years ago, and I'm just like, I want to do that again.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love Justin. So we were chatting before we started about accommodations, because a little perspective, we like to focus on equality, equity, accommodations, and advocacy. And you had a little bit of a different perspective on accommodations. And then you also, when we asked you how you preferred to have us refer to your disability, that you said blind, and then throughout that conversation you mentioned hierarchy of sight. So it's kind of a two-part question. I'd love to hear you talk about the hierarchy of sight and your thoughts on being referred to as blind, and because of that, and then also just your thoughts on accommodations and such.
Well, I could tell you a story about that. When I was in high school, the California School for the Blind had a program called STEP, and I don't remember what the acronym stood for, but the point was to teach blind or visually impaired high schoolers and almost college age students skills of independent living. And so they would work with you on cooking and traveling and using a computer and housework and so forth, the whole thing. And my favorite course at that place was stereotypically music. And I think it was because the teacher really more than anything, but of course also I got to play piano and we put together this whole ensemble, but that's beside the point. And anyway, but one day we were supposed to leave music and go to the cafeteria for dinner. And here I am, I'm partially sighted, and there's this girl named Kelly who was totally blind. And actually I was must have been about 16, and she was like 20, and give or take. So anyway, the class ends, I just go on ahead to the cafeteria because it's time to go to the cafeteria. And one of the counselors at the cafeteria meets me. He says, "Where's Kelly?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. She was back at the music room. I figure she's on her way." Well, he said, "Well, why didn't you wait for her?" I was like, "Well, because I was going to go to the cafeteria. Like, do I have a responsibility to do this?" So, you need to be waiting. You need to be aware of the totally blind students around here. And remember, I'm a minor. Kelly's an adult, and I'm a minor. And this man was basically telling me that I, as a partially sighted person, had a responsibility to make sure that this woman got where she needed to be, and as if she was the child. And I told him I thought that was kind of unreasonable. And he said, "Well, people can take advantage of women on this campus. We live in the middle of a city, and there can be incidents or something like that." And And that was shocking that they would have a program that was so unsafe that a woman couldn't walk around the campus independently on her own. So, they have a saying that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed guy is king. The thing about it is my eyesight has always been really limited, and I've always had knowledge that it was going to decline more. And I think it's really depressing to build my sense of self-worth on something that's going to go away. And I don't know, I went to this program one time and listened to this woman who was partially sighted talking about how she wanted to travel the world and experience everything before I go blind. And my dad actually phrased it the same way in referencing my travels too. And it's like saying, I want to experience the world before I die or something like that. And to me, I don't think losing your sight is dying. And so I don't like hierarchies of sight. I don't like being held up on a pedestal or held up as the superior one, or I don't like, being the minor child and being made to think like I need to be the adult because I have partial sight and somebody else is totally blind. And I think that blind people can do just as well as sighted people in everything. And so, yeah, I reject hierarchies of sight. And so for me, I always say I'm blind. And when I'm talking to most people, unless I'm talking to a blind person, in which case I do feel I need to disclose partial sight, because that would be sort of, if I told them, oh, I did this travel or whatever, like, you never know, how much it factors in. But I mean, I've known totally blind people who've traveled internationally too. So I don't like to lean on my vision. And everything I do is like a totally blind person. That's the other thing too. So if I'm applying for a job or something like that, like my coworkers don't really need to know my visual acuity or, the whole description about my eyesight or whatever. Like they need to know is that I need a screen reader and I need a screen reader, and that's actually mostly it. I read Braille, I use a cane. So everything is pretty much like a blind person anyway, despite my residual eyesight.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I think that sometimes in the little LP community, sometimes some of the average height parents can be a little more wanting to make all these accommodations for their children as they're growing up. Whereas if you look in the second and third generation LPs, typically they don't have all the accommodations. It's stools and some light switch and stuff like that. And so I think the knowing of I don't need all that is empowering, as opposed to the fear of oh God, are they going to need all this crap to be able to survive?
Yeah. Oh, so are you saying little people who grow up with non little person parents they'll get all these accommodations in their house, and do you think that somebody should not need to use those things? Or
of course, to each their own, I support bodily autonomy and all that 100%. But what I like to say is that I want the world to accommodate us as people with disabilities, not us have to, make all these accommodations to the world. So, making a screen reader just not a big deal to need or ask for. But, but also not making everything for one person or one type of person, because that's obviously the complete opposite of what we're trying to do. So,
right.
So I think, in my opinion, I'm sorry, I say all that to say, in my opinion, minimal at home type of accommodations is best, because you want your child to know how to problem solve and such.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I can see your point. I don't have any knowledge personally to be able to agree, but I do see your point. And I think that for me, and definitely, I think that we need to be able to, as a blind person, I think it's being able to learn what they call non-visual techniques and to be able to solve problems is important. And yeah, I think I can see the parallel. Like when you, my parents had to make quite a bit of noise around the school district for them to teach me Braille. And the view was that I could just sort of listen to tapes and that I didn't really, or that I could use large print because I had a residual eyesight. I mean, in a way, like partially sighted students, like when you're a partially sighted kid growing up, you can kind of feel like you're the real big man, you know, like you really got, people kind of like give you all these responsibilities compared to the blind kids. But on the other hand, you're really actually kind of disadvantaged because they also don't see the need to educate you as well either. And there's this attitude, I think, among sighted teachers and parents really too, that it's either Braille or print. And so my mom had to force them to teach me Braille. And I just figured out print because, my God, you're in a world where print is everywhere. You know, you learn it like you learn English. So it's not really a choice of one or the other. It's really a choice of one and the other, or just the other. But yeah, kids need to be able to learn, for blind people anyway, you need to be able to learn non-visual stuff because eyesight is really a sometime thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's so, you know, when you talk about international studies for people with a disability, how often do you come across students who are like, wow, I've never even considered that. I always just counted myself out because of my disability. And then, you know, they get to hear that there's a, you know, something that may work for them to be able to study abroad despite that.
I would love to say I encountered it more. And I think the reason why I don't see that as much is because people who are at that place don't know about us. And so I created the Access to Exchange Summer Institute, or now we've changed it to the Access to Exchange Summit. We don't want it to be tied to a season. I've created that to start doing outreach to the disability community. And historically, we've always from year to year done a disability outreach initiative where we said, okay, this year we're going to try to reach out to the disability community because we're super good at reaching out to professionals. We're not very good at reaching out to people with disabilities. But so then we go and make some phone calls or Zoom calls and we talk to people at organizations and we say, what do you think we need to do? And then they, like, people won't tell you if you're asking them something that's a ridiculous question. So I don't know if I'm asking them a ridiculous question. But whenever I've had those meetings and I go after, and everybody's super enthusiastic about the idea of exchange, but they don't really know a whole lot about, they'll say, well, hey, let us know when you're going to do something. That's kind of what they'll say. But other than that, they're kind of clueless on what to do. And our mission is a little different from their mission too. So sometimes we'll say, oh, you know, our strategy has been, how do we get them to take on our mission? But instead of having them take on our mission, they really want to keep with theirs, right? And so, but they do say, hey, let us know when you're going to do something. So I thought, let's do the AES. And that way we can start telling organizations we're doing this course this weekend and share it around so we can get people joining up and just, you know, and I think like if we curate a course that we do every single year, or even twice a year, that's branded under Access to Exchange an idea, it will start to become something that's known, and you know it'll be like the AAPD summer internship, or you know, I don't know. I'm sure the Little People of America probably has some sort of a scholarship or something that you know is really well known in your community. You know, so it'll become something like that where everybody will be like, hey, you know. Are you going to apply for the Access to Exchange Summit this year? You know, that sort of thing. That's my goal. And hopefully then we'll start meeting people like that who are at that place where they're like, God, I don't really even know if this is really for me. And we can start kind of changing viewpoints on that.
Oh, I love it. I love the dream big. I love it so much. Oh man, I love how technology has, and you spoke on it earlier when we were talking, has allowed for so much growth and evolution with, you know, the access to different things. My sister was a wheelchair user. She had achondroplasia and had some pretty severe physical difficulties because of it. And we would talk about the home, smart home stuff, and just how quickly that's becoming common now with Alexa and Siri and all the Google and all that stuff. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, it was really, really unaffordable and inaccessible. So what are some of your favorite basic, like accessible advocacy, or accessible apps and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the smart home revolution. You know, historically, I've had trouble accessing appliances in my house, and every appliance has like a digital screen, or more now they have touch screens, and it's nice to see a collection of home appliances now that you can control using your Amazon Echo. So yeah, I definitely second that enthusiasm of your sister about the smart home developments. But yeah, and for me, I think my life has probably been changed in the last couple of years. It's really hard to say. I think in the last 20 years, I think my life has been changed mostly by Apple, and they set a precedent by developing VoiceOver, which is their screen reader for Mac OS X in 2005. And that's a precedent that the manufacturer of the computers or the software should create in some way the access features in the software. And Apple has run ahead, and now their Mac OS X and iOS are all, they always are coming out with some new access feature every release, and they have probably the most robust screen reading experience that I'm aware of. And companies like Google and Microsoft have followed them, and Google has been creating a screen reader for its Chrome operating system and Android operating system, and Windows, Microsoft, it's been developing Narrator, and I think those companies have also been sponsoring NV Foundation, which has the screen reader NVDA, and essentially, 20 years ago, if you bought a screen reader, it would have been $1,000, and now it's nothing. It's basically free, included with your computer, and that's been quite a revolution. And 5 years ago, I'd say actually, this is really striking. I mean, 20 years ago, the most game-changing technology was from an access company like Humanware, and like I used to have this Braille Note, which was a computer that had a Braille display on it. And now, like, the most revolutionary thing came from Microsoft, and it's an app called Seeing AI, and you can install it on your iPhone, and you basically point it at text or objects and it announces them to you. So 5 years ago, just 5 years ago, when I moved here to Eugene in Oregon, I wasn't able to read my mail very easily when it came to me. And now all I've got to do is bust out that app and point it at the envelope, and it announces the text live. So it's quite amazing to see where we've come just even in the last 5 years for blind people.
Yes, thank you for sharing all that. Like I'm just listening to you. I've learned so much today, just like with the apps and just like the evolution of technology and just like how, about making global, study abroad, like more accessible, for people with disabilities. So we are running out of time, but I wanted to wrap up with a couple more questions for you, Justin. Like even with the advancements of technology or making it more accessible, what message would you like to leave our viewers? And what more can the world do to make it better for, people who are blind and for people with disabilities in general?
Good question. I think that, I don't know, Samyukta, what do you think the world can do? I don't know. That's a deep question.
That is a deep question. I mean, I always, there's so much, like we are, ever since the ADA or ever since history, I just feel like there's a lot more we could do, like especially, in 2021, like where like I'm still having to fight with, you know, public places to get accommodations, or like we're still trying to, like, why is it so hard to put, you know, a basic step stool in, you know, a public bathroom when you have kids running around in every corner, you know, just simple things like that. So it's, I'm glad like this year, like we're definitely being more on the forefront, but especially with these podcasts and with social media, because, you know, like people are able to, you know, hear other stories that way. But I feel that like these laws, whatever laws that are in place, need to be revamped. They need to be looked at again. They need to be like rewritten to align with the times, you know, and like.
Okay, so Samyukta, is this a make-a-wish thing? Like, what is my wish, or is this kind of within the realm of the feasible? Because I got two answers. One that's kind of a make-a-wish, and one that's within the realm of the feasible.
What am I thinking?
Let's hear both. Let's hear both.
Yeah.
My both. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, within the realm of the feasible, you know, for physical access for years, every state and, you know, I think the government, there's a big, you know, 700 page manual for architects that outlines what access looks like in a community space. And so, you know, architects don't have to understand from us what access looks like. They don't even care. Like I've talked to architects and city planners that just seem totally indifferent to the notion, but they're just like, we just follow the manual and we just implement it, you know. Like for me, what I would do is I like to have a manual for accessibility online and of online applications and websites. And we have the WCAG standards, which outline what access looks like, at least on the web. But I would like to see WCAG get some more regulatory teeth in it. So that way, when website developers, so that we can bring website developers more under the realm of where city planners are, where when you create a website, you know, they might still kind of be like, oh, I just follow the regulations. But, you know, at the end, they'll create an accessible website or an accessible app. And I think for me, one of the biggest troubles that I have is like, I go to a work site and they use some sort of software that's not accessible, and it makes it hard for me to really distinguish myself or do a good job. So that's what I would ask for within the feasible. And I think my make-a-wish is that people, I was having a conversation with my brother the other day, and he works for LinkedIn. And from his point of view, for the developers that he works with, they were creating this internal form that only LinkedIn employees would use. And they didn't even design the form so that you could navigate back and forth from the edit fields using the tab key. So, I mean, something that like you would never see a form on the user facing end that you couldn't navigate around using the tab key. That's like the most basic thing ever. But from my brother and his developer point of view, that wasn't really essential. It wasn't necessary even for LinkedIn employees. Then they got an email from somebody saying, make this accessible because I work for LinkedIn and you can't ignore us or whatever. And so now they're talking about, oh, great, yeah, we'll do that, you know, but for you people or whatever. So there's always going to be kind of this prevailing attitude that accessibility is always that anything that makes something easier to use for a disabled person is automatically just a disability thing. And it's sort of, there's this sort of degrading attitude about access. And I kind of would like to see a sort of shift in the way people think about access, as it's something that benefits everyone. And what I can say to you right now is, you know, disabled people have subsidized much of the technology that makes your iPhone what it is now. I mean, the reason why you can snap a picture of a sign with your iPhone and, you know, translate it into a different language, or, you know, the reason why you can, you know, read your voicemails now on Google Voice instead of having to listen to them. That's because blind people have always subsidized the development of optical character recognition technology since the 70s, in part. And it's also because physically disabled people have in part subsidized the development of voice recognition technologies like Drag and Dictate. So, I mean, it's really striking to me to see how much accessibility and accessible technology has actually enhanced the user experience for everybody, and it's delivered to us these features in our tablets and our iPhones and in our computers that even developers 10 years ago would have just thought were absolutely ridiculous and never going to happen. And so anyway, maybe within the realm of my make-a-wish is that people would kind of look at that and realize like, hey, actually access is, it makes something usable for, just because something is more usable for people with disabilities doesn't mean that that's all it's for.
Yeah, I think that COVID really, like we said earlier about the delivery of shipping or shopping, sorry, and just working from home and those kinds of things really came about and showed that, oh, like these things not only work for this certain situation that's really unique, but also for these everyday situations for these people who want to be, a very active part of the workforce, but have limitations. So, here's the solution. And so hopefully things like that can be more above the radar now that we really see in real time how well it works.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you, Angela.
Well, thank you so much, Justin. You've made such great points, and I totally agree with you. Just like seeing how like it's making things accessible for people with disabilities it's not a burden. It's not like it's really about changing the attitude and making it not seem like we're an inconvenience, because when it works for us, it works for everybody. That's what that message needs to hit home. So the last question we wanted to ask you was, is there anything, well, first, before I get to that, is there anything else you want to share with us today? Anything else you'd like our viewers to know about you or about access or about disability? Anything at all?
I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I hope that viewers will check out MIUSA. So you can go to miusa.org and learn about us. And if you have any questions about study or volunteer abroad, it's really for everybody. And we want to hear from people. Clearinghouse@miusa.org.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And then the last question we have is how we like to end each interview. It's like, what is one of the most ridiculous things that ever happened to you, or the ridiculous like question or comment or any situation that that you encountered?
That is a challenging one. Yeah, I gotta go back. I mean, people, I guess it's just the occasionally invasive questions I get from people about like, how much sight do you have or whatever. That's a really common one. It's usually just people who don't know you and are just trying to satisfy their idle curiosity. Actually, it's really funny because what'll happen is a sighted person will walk up to me and be like, can I ask you a personal question? Like, I literally already know what they're gonna say. Like, I should just respond like, it's 2400, dude. Like,
yeah. Do you feel like, Justin, people are comfortable asking you questions from a genuine wanting to know more, or even not even just asking you questions about that, but like getting ahead of some of your needs? If you're going somewhere, do you find that more people are starting to think of, oh, hey, what do you need, or what can we do for you for this? And I'm sorry if my question is not making sense. I can rephrase it because
I think I see that maybe more now in international education. It seems like I'm noticing that.
Oh, good.
Like, are you talking about, you're asking me like if I'm seeing kind of an improvement in the way that people respond to me, or like that they maybe offer more assistance or more useful assistance?
Yeah, are people more proactive in finding or meeting your accommodation needs?
I think things are better.
Okay.
If that's I think I think things are better. People are less proactive, but then again, it's like, I don't know, in South America, you know, blind people in South America look to us and they think, God, those Americans are so cold, you know.
Wow.
I was in the United States and I stood on a street corner for 2 whole minutes and nobody came to help me cross. But then, you know, for blind people in the US, we go down there and Chile and or Mexico, and it's like, God, everybody's like, you know, manhandling me everywhere I go. And it's like, you know, so I don't know. I find people tend to offer unsolicited help less, but I think that generally that things are improving quite a lot. I mean, and maybe it's just because of the fact that now we have like in jobs, you know, we have 3% unemployment now almost instead of 8% unemployment. I mean, 7 years ago, like if I looked at jobs, it was pretty routine to see like a requirement that you had a driver's license and a clean driving record, or that you could type on a keyboard at 60 words a minute. So I don't see those rules as much anymore. And I tell you what, like higher education, universities were the worst for those kinds of requirements. And now, I mean, I've looked at a handful of university job announcements and I'm not seeing those anymore. So yeah, I'm definitely seeing things improving quite a bit.
Those are things that I wouldn't have even thought of, but now that you say it, it's obvious. Wow. I'm so glad that you do see some improvement though. That's great.
Have you seen improvement? Do you find like it's easier to, you go to a hotel to get a, you know, a stool or kind of what extra you need, or do you find
Yes.
anything's changed at all? Like when you go to the store and ask for help?
I definitely do feel like things have improved a lot. I think that people still have a hard time refusing help, like or having their help refused. Like if I'm putting my stuff in the trunk, then and somebody insists on helping me and I tell them no, I don't find that that's improved much, but I do find like the people being like if I'm standing in, which I do delivery because I hate shopping, but if I'm standing in an aisle looking up at something, people are more often nowadays going to say, is there something I can help you with? As opposed to, you know, a few years ago. But I also live in the South, and culturally, you know, we are a little more friendly from what I hear. So, you know, I love how you talk about the culture and stuff, because it's all valid. So I know we're trying to wrap up. We could keep going, Sammy. I'm sorry, I keep on, you know, because we really could.
Oh, this is good. This is so good.
Yeah,
I feel like we
it's
can
been
talk.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Justin,
Thank
for being
you.
part of a little perspective and for taking and for your time and sharing your story and experiences. I know our viewers are gonna, you know, learn a lot just, you know, by hearing what you've, you know, endured and what you succeeded in, and how you're changing the world too. So thank you again.
Thank you, Samyukta and Angela. It's been fun to share my point of view with you, and I look forward to seeing it come out.
Yes.
Yeah, we are so excited. And we will have all of the links and such in the comments below so that everybody can easily access the things that you referred to and we talked about. Thank you again, Justin. This was so awesome. So much information. And like I said, we could go on and on. So, and thank you, Samyukta. This was an incredible interview. We love all of you, and we hope that you all have a most wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.